The journey of caring for a loved one who is living with dementia can be quite challenging. The aim of this podcast is to make caregiving less daunting and more fulfilling. On this platform, we share knowledge, understanding, and experiences. We enlighten, give hope, and encourage, and in the process, create positive awareness about different aspects of dementia. Welcome to my podcast, Dementia Caregivers Corner. My name is Juliah. Dementia Care, how deep is your love? Today, on the Dementia Caregivers Corner podcast, we're talking about practicing anticipatory grief through documentation. I'm joined by acclaimed oral historian, Dr. Rachel Seidman, who has discovered that preserving family stories can be a powerful way to navigate grief. After recording her brother-in-law's oral history during his terminal illness, Rachel experienced firsthand how holding onto someone's voice and memories can bring comfort, connection, and meaning. In her upcoming book, Our Story, she shares practical and accessible ways to record and preserve family histories and explains why this practice can help us prepare for loss with intention and love. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome in today's episode Dr. Rachel Seidman. I hope I pronounced that surname well.
Yes, Rachel Seidman. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Seidman, just 3 days ago, I came across a post on LinkedIn from a lady named Miriam Waitling. We follow each other on LinkedIn. The post, she titled it, Dementia, a Lonely Journey, the beginning of anticipatory grief. So in that post, she wrote, let me open quote here, unless you walk this journey yourself, it is hard, even for professionals and academics, to fully understand the depth of pain that comes with loving and caring for someone with dementia. She continued, I worked for over 10 years with people living with dementia and believed I understood it well. Only when it became personal did I realize that what I knew was only a small part of the reality. So my question to you is, for our listeners who may be unfamiliar with the term, how would you define anticipatory grief, particularly in the context of dementia, if you can as well?
Well, let me start by saying I also am not an expert in dementia, but to me, anticipatory grief is that feeling that sometimes washes over us, when someone is just fine, but we know that they're aging and that they won't be with us forever, or when we recognize that we ourselves won't be around forever and there are things that we will never get to see, perhaps, a granddaughter's growing older or something. So it's that feeling of sadness and grief that you have even before a loss has happened.
Okay. Yeah, in the context of dementia, what I come across or what I read somewhere in some articles, or the people that I relate with, I sometimes hear them saying it is even more hard for people living with dementia because of the memory decline. So yes, I understand where you're coming from. So tell us, why document before loss? I had a guest on my podcast here called Kimberly Littlemore. She was a BBC award-winning filmmaker. Both her parents lived with dementia. She captured that real life, raw footage of how they were living or interacting together as a couple. And her intention really was to raise awareness about dementia and how it manifests itself in a raw state. So my question is, Kimberly was documenting so that to raise awareness. What I want to know is why would you want to document before a loss? What are the benefits of that?
Right. Well, so my book, Our Story, is really for people who want to document their family's history. And there's many, many different reasons that people want to do that, but it is often motivated by the sense that our older family members will not be around forever. And when they die, those stories that they hold inside them are gone. And for people whose family members are suffering with dementia, there's this added pressure that those stories may disappear even before the person dies, right? And so, we know that in some cases, the longer ago memories actually stay with people longer. Sometimes they lose their short-term memory before they start losing their long-term memory. So there's this kind of sense that even before this person dies, we may lose these memories. And I think whether your family is grappling with dementia or not, there's multiple reasons for sitting down with someone and spending the time to ask them questions about their life, to really listen to them without, as much as possible, without judgment, without jumping into a conversation, but really just letting the focus be on them and their story. And some of that is about the present and about your relationship with the person today and in that moment, and the kind of powerful intimacy that can, reveal or encourage, that deep listening to someone. But also in the future, right, you will now have their voice. I think for a lot of us, when we suffer a loss, one of the hardest things is that feeling that we'll never hear their voice again. And if you have an audio recording of them when you are emotionally ready, you can listen to them again. But also, you have preserved their stories and their memories to pass on to future generations.
Brilliant. I'm laughing. I once supported a lady who lived with vascular dementia. She loved dancing. She enjoyed music. And so do I. I am that girl who loved music, who loved dancing. So you can imagine the combination. So the family gave us the permission to capture those joyful moments. And she died 2024 in November. So I shared some of the clips that I had. And, it was just lovely. They were very grateful for that. And they even shared some of those videos at the funeral. So that's one. Number two, people record their joyful moments for various reasons. Some record to share on social media. My question is, how is recording for public consumption different from documenting intentionally to preserve family history?
I think that's a really good question. And in my book, one of the things that I talk about is really thinking from the beginning about, what is motivating you to take on this project? Why do you want to do it? And what are you hoping to get out of it? And B, who do you imagine the audience will be? Because those two things will shape your approach to a family history documentation project. So I ask people to think about, if you're going to share stories with people outside of your family, you need to get permission from the people whose stories you're sharing. And so I talk through consent forms that we use in the practice of oral history. Even if it's, may not be on social media, but if you think that down the line you might want to, for instance, donate transcripts of the interviews to your local historical society, which would probably be a wonderful thing to do, the Historical Society will want to make sure that you have signed consent forms, that it's okay for you to do that. So there are lots of things to think through in terms of who you're doing this for and why, and that will shape your approach. I like to think of it sort of as planning a journey, planning a road trip. Some people just get in the car and they drive wherever the road takes them, and that can be really wonderful. Other people, though, benefit from at least looking at a map and knowing what it is I want to get from this road trip. Because if what I want are scenic views of the ocean, then I need to go one route. If I'm just trying to get from A to B as quickly as possible, then I'm going to go a different route. And so thinking through why you're doing this and for whom and how you plan to share it before you start is often a useful thing to go through.
But tell me, Dr. Seidman, I think you mentioned some things earlier, but I want to know from you, can documentation prepare us for loss? I want you to share your personal experience with your brother-in-law, because I think I mentioned when I was reading your profile that you recorded him during the last days. I want you to share that experience with our listeners, and then let us know how that helped you emotionally to prepare for his loss.
Yes. So my brother-in-law, Dan, had leukemia, and he had gone through a bone marrow transplant, which actually they had told him had been successful. And we all had a party to celebrate. But then it soon became clear that that had not been the case. And so, much to everyone's shock, it became clear that he was going to die. And I was deeply, deeply involved. I lived nearby and was in the hospital, many days over many months, and was myself experiencing that anticipatory grief that we talked about. I was very close with Dan. But I also knew that I had more emotional distance than his wife or his parents or his children, who really probably would not have been able to undertake this project in that particular moment, right? It just wasn't possible for them. So I'm not saying that everyone whose family member is dying is going to feel able and ready to sit down with them and record an oral history. I'm not, that is not necessarily going to be the case. But for some people in certain situations, it can be a wonderful experience. So Dan and I sat on the living room couch for, I forget how many hours we sat there. And I knew that what I was doing was giving Dan a chance to sort of reflect back on his life, to make sense of certain things and decisions, and to give credit to his parents and other people, to leave something behind that showed what he appreciated about the people, his wife, his children, gave him a chance to sort of record his thoughts and feelings about them and his hopes for his children in the future, and knowing that really the audience for this would be those he left behind. I should say Dan was I think he was 49. He wasn't even 50 years old. So his children were, young teenagers, and his wife was going to be a young widow, and his parents were surviving him and his brother. And so it was a very, very difficult situation. And I, because I was a professional oral historian, it was not something that was hard for me technically or, in terms of the practice. So I also felt like almost, I'm Jewish and we say it's a mitzvah, right? It's a thing I can do for other people. It's a gift I can give to other people. So it felt like something that when there really wasn't much else left that I could do, this was something I could do for them.
Yes. Did you think that prepared you eventually for his death?
Well, I mean, nothing can truly prepare you to lose someone at that age, but it did help me feel like I had done what I could do, right? I had made sure that his voice and his story would be preserved. And I knew that it was something that at some point, his children would be happy to have. So in that sense, where you don't want to end up feeling like there was something you could have or should have done, in that sense, it prepared me. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. May his soul continue to rest in peace. I heard when we changed the subject to talking about Dan, your voice changed, the emotions that came in. So I'm sorry about that. You mentioned that because you are a historian, you're technical, but the human part of you came in when you talked about him. We forget about, yes, you forget about that. I was talking to another Dan. Dan is in America as well. And his dad died with dementia. He has written a book as well, and he calls it Awakenings in Real Life, where he was sharing with me that the father awakened from dementia for some few days, and the father was lucid. The father was able to talk sense. And fortunately, the brother was there at the right time to capture that on video. So that's impressive there. So going forward, my mind is still with your emotions. The one that I just felt from you just hit me as well, that we are talking about life and death here. But yeah, so going forward, I supported this other lady. Every time when the family visited, she had forgotten the names of the children, adult children. She would say, I don't know your names, but I know you love me. Which is a behavior that is common in dementia. Obviously, my examples will be dementia related because we are a dementia podcast, but you are going to include everything in there. So that's a behavior that is common in dementia, to forget loved ones' names. The point that I'm trying to get out of you here is that sometimes timelines fade, names fade. And what I want to know is that how do you conduct meaningful oral history interviews when someone may have forgotten names, events, chronology?
First, I would say that all of us, whether we have dementia or not, forget details, and we may mix things up. And there have been some famous oral history studies about that, about why people remember things differently than they actually happened. And there's a lot of study around that. People try to make meaning out of the past, and sometimes their memories kind of conform to the meaning that they're trying to make. And so I wouldn't say that there is, of course, there's difference in terms of the extent and the sort of dramatic nature of the loss of chronology and names and things when you're dealing with dementia, but all of our memories are fallible. And what I, as an oral historian, really try to focus on is, in most cases, if there's a date that someone can't remember, or it seems like maybe they're getting the chronology wrong, I can go figure that out. I can look in the newspaper. I can ask someone else in the family. I can use books, history to figure out when in time was this actually happening. Oftentimes that's not what matters. What matters is the story that they're telling you, because that story, for some reason or another, is important to them. It has stayed with them. And so what you want to capture is the story in whatever level of richness they can tell it, and maybe asking them about why that story is important to them? What is it about that story that is meaningful to them is much more, I think, what the method of interviewing someone allows us to do. And our interviews should not be at all a kind of argument. Like, no, Mom, it didn't happen at that time. I'm pretty sure it happened at this time. You don't want to get into a debate. You want to listen and recognize that if you're going to try to use this to create a timeline or something, that might not be the best use of the story, but as a way to understand things that happened in the past, ways that this person experienced their childhood, things that are important to them that they want to pass along. Those are the ways to use these stories.
Just comes onto my mind right now. Would that make sense to use you as an oral historian than using a family member? I'm just there because this is your field. You will go out and find more information to corroborate maybe what has been said. But just take myself, that's Julia. I am doing that. Would that have weight as just a family member or an expert in the field?
Well, I mean, again, I think this is where you want to think about, what is this for? If this interview is just for your experience, you want to preserve your mother's voice, you want to have those stories recorded to maybe pass down to future generations, you do not need the services of a professional oral historian, because part of what you want is the experience of talking to your mother and the intimacy of that. On the other hand, if you know that every interaction causes you stress and frustration, and you're not going to be able to do an interview calmly, but you think there's enough memory there that's worth preserving, you can hire freelance interviewers to do this kind of thing. And you could ask them to do background research that would help to put this in context of the history of your city or neighborhood or nation.
Tell me then, is it too late to start? I mean, many caregivers will be like, oh, maybe I should have started earlier. So is it ever too late to begin documenting a loved one story?
I don't think so. There may be times when, if they can't speak, then it's probably too late. But if they still do have stories to share, then I think those are probably worth. Yeah, I mean, sometimes people will say, I'm so sick of hearing this story over and over again. I don't think, but I do think that those are probably worth documenting and keeping for future generations.
Earlier, you mentioned that we should bear in mind that we are not here to argue. There are family dynamics everywhere. How do you navigate family members, maybe who are not forthcoming, who don't want to come on board, yet they know the importance of documenting that history?
One of the things that I suggest people do is find something that really is important to that person. I talk about maybe your great uncle has a workshop in his garage, and, he's not a generally talkative person, but if you went into the workshop with him, you could ask him about when he learned to carve wood, who taught him, why does he like doing it, what does he get out of it, when did he make that dollhouse that's sitting over there, who was that for? So rather than saying, okay, I'm going to sit down and capture your whole life history and I want to know from beginning to end, you can start, maybe there's a china cabinet with china in it, and you can start by asking your grandmother about that china and where it came from and who gave her that set of candlesticks. And so you can elicit memories and stories about people through the objects that are important to people and that they have in their homes. You can sit down with a photo album and just look at the pictures and have people tell you. So many of us, I have stacks of photo albums with people that I don't necessarily know exactly who that is or, who the stories are because they've been passed down through generations. So you can have them talk to you about this trip that they took to Japan and why they went there and what do they remember about it. And so sometimes people who are resistant, sometimes people think, my life is not that interesting. And I don't really have anything to tell you. But if you start with the things that are really important to them or are not abstract, but are tangible, sometimes that's an easier way to go.
Okay, great. I'm going to still use the same lady that I supported on this next one. As I said, that this woman, Jennifer, she loved music. At one point, I asked each of the children to bring in some favorite songs that they used to listen with their mother so that we can compile a playlist on Alexa, which came in handy when now she was bedridden. So we were always playing that in the background. And I'm here thinking or wondering even, can a playlist be a form of documentation?
Yeah.
And then another thing, there are so many mediums that we can use to document. So how do families choose the right format for their situation?
That's a wonderful example, a playlist as a form of documentation. And you could combine it with oral history by playing a song and then asking someone, often those stories, those songs trigger memories of dancing with my children when they were little or my prom or, whatever it is. So you can combine the music itself with the sharing of memories and stories. One of the things I talk about in the book is that sometimes people hear family history and they think, then I would have to write a book. I don't have it in me to write a book. But what I try to do is say, no, there's lots and lots of different wonderful ways to share what you've learned about your family history. And those, my mother, when I was pregnant with my first daughter, my mom wrote to everyone in the family and asked them to send her a piece of clothing that they weren't wearing anymore, but that they loved. And she made quilts out of them. And my grandmother actually also provided a shirt or something from my grandfather who had died. So he was also represented in the quilt. And then along with the quilt was a little booklet explaining what each fabric represented and whose it was and things. And then later, when my daughters were older and getting interested in cooking, my mom asked everyone in the family to send in, both sides of the family, my husband's family and our family. She asked them to send in recipes that had been important growing up, were part of the sort of family tradition, and to share if they had a story about when they used to make this recipe, and she created cookbooks for everyone that were, kind of combination cookbook and family history. So there's many, many different ways to share. And I think it can become part of a family practice almost, the sharing of family stories.
Beautiful. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think would really help our listeners?
No, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, all right. So let's come to your book. I've got it here with me. I've got a copy. Thank you very much.
Great.
So you are about to release this book on the 5th of May, which happens to be my birthday, by the way.
Oh, how fabulous. Happy birthday in advance. Yeah.
Yeah, so what can readers expect from this book? Where would it be available? How is it even different from other books in the market out there?
So the book should be available at all your local bookstores. You can also order it online from all of the usual places that people order books online. It's published by Simon and Schuster. What you can expect is very clear sort of advice on how to approach a family history project that is focused on oral history, on interviewing people in your family. So I think the thing that makes it different from what a lot of other books offer is it's not focused on genealogy, by which I mean it's not focused on trying to just fill out a family tree and go back as far as you possibly can. It's really focused on those who are still living and eliciting stories from them that you can record. And I share a lot of personal reflections. I tell that story of interviewing Dan in the book and other personal reflections about history in my family, just as a way to open up the process and to sort of give people a sense of this is something that you also can do. And then I really try to provide I guess, scaffolding for your project. So I take you sort of step by step through how one might go about this. And even in the book itself, there's room to take notes or write things down. I ask a few questions and prompts to get you kind of thinking, and there's place in the book to write down your answers so that by the time you get through the book, you will have really prepared yourself to undertake a family history. I tried to write it in a really accessible voice. It is not
academic.
Yeah, it's not academic at all. There's a lot of books out there about how to do oral history, but most of them are aimed at students, graduate students, undergraduate students in college classes, or people who are really doing big oral history academic studies. They're, less aimed at families who just want to interview a couple family members. So I think it's different in that way. And I really hope it's going to be helpful to a lot of people out there who kind of have that feeling that they probably should do this, but they really don't know where to start. And I'm hoping that this will really give people the encouragement and the confidence they need to sit down and have those conversations.
Yes. I think the one thing that I was concerned about was like, okay, you know how academics are always too academic, like even in their writing, in their speeches. I was like, okay, that is not a go. But I would look at it and I'm like, okay, this is your normal everyday language. That's what I see from it. People should not run away thinking that, because this is Dr. Seidman, so it's going to be academic now. So, no, thank you for your time, Rachel. Am I pronouncing your surname correctly again? Seidman, you said?
Seidman, yeah.
Seidman.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our episode. So what I get from here is that, guys, ladies and gentlemen, please document, and document. You will thank yourself later. To our listeners, let me take this time and thank you for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Seidman, or you are passionate about dementia care, please consider leaving a review and sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Your support helps us reach more people and raise awareness about dementia-related issues. Until we meet next time, thank you for listening and bye for now. Ta-da! Dementia care. How deep is your love?